Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Houthis have fired missiles, drones at Israel. How big a threat are they? How deadly is the Israel-Gaza war for journalists? How the world lost faith in the UN. America's economic might gives it little sway in the Middle East. U.S. forces under fire in Middle East as America slides towards brink. Houthis have fired missiles, drones at Israel. How big a threat are they? Al Jazeera. The Houthi movement in Yemen has shot down a U.S. drone, raising fears of a regional escalation after the group effectively declared war on Israel. The Iran-linked Houthi group controls large parts of Yemen and has launched 3 rounds of attacks on Israel since the October 7 Hamas attack that killed over 1,400 Israelis. The group's military spokesman announced on October 31 that they had launched rockets, ballistic missiles, and drones towards Israel, vowing to continue until Israeli aggression stops. None of the projectiles reached Israel, either being destroyed by defense systems or falling short. The Houthis also launched drones and missiles intended for Israel that caused explosions in 2 Egyptian Red Sea towns on October 27. Iran has warned that if Israeli strikes in Gaza do not stop, new fronts could be opened by the Resistance Axis, a network of groups aligned to Iran. The Houthi movement, also known as Ansar Allah, has been in control of large parts of Yemen since 2014 and is backed by Iran. The group's attacks on Israel are seen as a message of support for Hamas and a signal to Israel that it can reach it with missile and drone strikes. How deadly is the Israel-Gaza war for journalists? Al Jazeera. A total of 39 journalists, 34 of them Palestinians, have been killed since the latest conflict erupted in Gaza on October 7, making it the deadliest month for journalists on record, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. At least 4 Israelis and 1 Lebanese journalist have also been killed. The death toll for the entire Russia-Ukraine war, by contrast, is 17. The rate of attrition among journalists in Gaza has shocked the international community. Christophe Deloire, RSF Secretary General, has described the number of deaths as shocking, and expects the number to rise as investigations continue. RSF has reported that 10 journalists in Gaza were killed while working, and that 48 media facilities have been hit or destroyed. The CPJ has stated that 10 other journalists were killed in their homes with their families. RSF has submitted a complaint to the International Criminal Court, ICC, accusing Israel of war crimes against journalists in Gaza. The International Federation for Journalists, IFJ, has called on Israeli authorities to take full responsibility for protecting journalists covering the conflict. How the world lost faith in the UN. Foreign Affairs. The United Nations, UN, is facing a crisis of confidence amidst the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, according to diplomats and UN officials. The organization has struggled to respond effectively to these crises, and tensions between Russia and the West have undermined discussions on unrelated issues in Africa and the Middle East. The war between Israel and Hamas threatens to further damage the UN's credibility, with the United States' unconditional support for Israel causing diplomatic damage. The divide among member states over the Israel-Palestine conflict has also raised doubts about the United States' recent push to improve its relations with the Global South at the UN, as some countries may reject future resolutions in support of Ukraine in response to the lack of Western solidarity with the Palestinians. The wars in the Middle East and Ukraine have put enormous pressure on UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and the UN's conflict management system, as unified support from the Security Council has been lacking and governments and warring parties have refused to work with UN mediators or demanded the withdrawal of UN peacekeepers. However, the UN can still find its footing by adapting its diplomatic and security roles to new global realities. It can focus on a limited number of priorities and hand off crisis management to others when possible. Furthermore, the UN can support other crisis managers, such as regional organizations and individual countries, and continue to play a substantial role in international conflict management through its relief agencies and efforts in conflict prevention. Despite the challenges it faces, the UN remains a crucial platform for cooperation and dialogue among member states. America's economic might gives it little sway in the Middle East. Economist. American diplomats have been working to prevent the Middle East from descending into further chaos following the recent conflict between Hamas and Israel. However, their efforts have so far yielded little results. The U.S. had hoped to use financial incentives to persuade countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon to cooperate, but it no longer has the economic tools to do so. In the past, the U.S. forgave debts and provided aid as a means of exerting influence, but now it lacks the means to compensate governments. The economic situation in the Middle East has deteriorated significantly, with countries like Lebanon and Jordan teetering on the edge of financial ruin. The U.S. has shifted its aid policies in the region in the hopes that prosperity would stabilize its allies, but economic growth has been minimal. The U.S. now finds itself in a difficult position, with few options for exerting influence or compelling cooperation. Sanctions have become a more common tool, but they are not effective in addressing the urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza. U.S. forces under fire in Middle East as America slides towards brink. Reuters. An Iranian-backed militia in Iraq launched a defective drone at the Erbil air base on October 26, which failed to detonate and only caused a service member to suffer a concussion from the impact. This incident was one of 40 separate drone and rocket attacks launched at U.S. forces by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria over the past 3 weeks in response to U.S. support for Israel in the Gaza war. Although these attacks have so far only caused minor injuries, the risks are growing and the possibility of a major strike that draws the U.S. into a conflict is a very realistic concern. It is currently unclear how President Joe Biden would respond to a major attack that kills a large number of Americans. The U.S. has deployed 2 aircraft carrier strike groups and taken additional steps to protect its troops in the region, such as by beefing up security at military bases and increasing patrols. However, Biden's response has not been strong enough for many critics, including Republicans in Congress. Live updates: negotiations underway for 3-day humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, officials say. The Independent. Negotiations are underway for a 3-day humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for the release of around a dozen hostages held by Hamas. The deal, brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S., would allow more aid to enter the besieged territory, including limited amounts of fuel. The war, which has been ongoing for 2 months, was triggered by the October 7 Hamas attack on southern Israel. Over 10,500 Palestinians have been killed in the war, including more than 4,300 children. More than 160 Palestinians have been killed in the occupied West Bank and 1,400 people in Israel, with 239 hostages taken. Palestinian Authority open to Gaza role if U.S. backs two-state solution. New York Times. The Palestinian Authority has told the Biden administration that it is open to a governance role in post-Hamas Gaza if the United States commits to a full-fledged two-state solution to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, according to a top official of its parent, the Palestine Liberation Organization. The official, Hussein al-Sheikh, the PLO's Secretary General, said he had told Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken last week that the Palestinian Authority sought a commitment from the U.S. administration, with a comprehensive political decision that would include the Gaza Strip, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Speaking to the New York Times on Tuesday in Ramallah, the West Bank city where the Palestinian Authority is headquartered, Mr. al-Sheikh said that Palestinian leaders were looking for a serious American initiative that would force Israel to abide by it, to commit to it. He added, this current U.S. administration is capable of doing that. Heavy fighting in northern Gaza as UN accuses Israel and Hamas of war crimes. ABC. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, claim to have captured a Hamas stronghold in Jabalia, after 10 hours of combat with Hamas militants. They also say that they killed dozens of militants, seized weapons and exposed tunnel shafts. Heavy fighting continues in the north of the Gaza Strip, with both sides reporting inflicting heavy casualties on one another. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says that both Israel and Hamas have committed war crimes and called for an immediate ceasefire. Italian Defense Minister, Guido Crosetto, has announced that Italy will send a hospital ship to Gaza to help treat victims of the conflict. Middle East Roundup, heading for tunnels, is Israeli assault faltering? Al Jazeera. As Israel's land incursion into Gaza continues, Hamas is pushing back against the Israeli ground invasion. The war between Israel and Gaza is expected to be very bloody, particularly if the battle goes underground into Hamas's feared tunnels. In addition, the conflict is having a significant humanitarian impact on the people of Gaza. The bombardment has not let up and children make up nearly half of the over 10,000 people killed. Israel is also bombing hospitals, despite them being the only safe haven for many tens of thousands of families. Americans are uneasy about Middle East sports push, post-UMD poll finds. Washington Post. About 40% of Americans view Middle Eastern investment in U.S. sports negatively, according to a poll by the Washington Post University of Maryland. The survey found that 45% of sports fans would be indifferent to such an investment. The only professional U.S. teams that have accepted investment from a Middle Eastern sovereign wealth fund are the NBA's Washington Wizards and the NHL's Washington Capitals, both of which sold a 5% stake each to the Qatar Investment Authority. The NFL is the only top-tier U.S. sports league that does not accept such investment, but industry insiders expect this to change soon. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six from the 6 Degrees World, here to bring you the latest news from around the globe. Today, we discuss the escalating threat from the Houthi movement in Yemen, the deadly impact of the Israel-Gaza war on journalists, the United Nations crisis of confidence, America's struggle to exert influence in the Middle East, the increasing attacks on U.S. forces in the region, negotiations for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority's willingness to play a role in post-Hamas Gaza, heavy fighting in northern Gaza, and Americans' unease about Middle Eastern investment in U.S. sports. Now, let's dive into the analysis. The Houthi movement's attacks on Israel are a cause for concern, as they demonstrate the group's ability to reach Israeli territory with missile and drone strikes. However, their projectiles have been largely ineffective due to Israel's defense systems. This highlights the importance of Israel's advanced military capabilities in countering threats from various actors in the region. The high number of journalist casualties in the Israel-Gaza war is alarming. It is essential for all parties involved to respect the safety and freedom of the press. The Committee to Protect Journalists and other organizations are working to hold those responsible for these attacks accountable. The international community must continue to advocate for the protection of journalists in conflict zones. The United Nations is facing a crisis of confidence as it struggles to effectively respond to ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. The divide among member states over the Israel-Palestine conflict has raised doubts about the UN's ability to address other global issues. However, the UN can adapt and find its footing by focusing on a limited number of priorities and supporting other crisis managers, such as regional organizations and individual countries. The economic situation in the Middle East poses challenges for American diplomats attempting to exert influence in the region. The U.S. no longer has the economic tools to incentivize cooperation from countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon. Sanctions have become a more common tool, but they are not effective in addressing the urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza. The U.S. must find alternative ways to engage with regional partners and address the root causes of instability. The increasing attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East by Iranian-backed militias are a cause for concern. While these attacks have so far only caused minor injuries, the risks are growing. It is crucial for President Joe Biden to respond strongly to any major attack that threatens American lives. The deployment of additional troops and increased security measures are steps in the right direction, but more robust action may be necessary to deter further aggression. Negotiations for a 3-day humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza are underway, which could provide much-needed relief to the besieged territory. Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. are brokering the deal, which would allow aid to enter Gaza and facilitate the release of hostages held by Hamas. However, a long-term solution to the Israel-Gaza conflict remains elusive, and sustained efforts are needed to address the root causes of the conflict and promote lasting peace. The Palestinian Authority's willingness to play a governance role in post-Hamas Gaza is contingent upon a comprehensive two-state solution. The Biden administration has the opportunity to push for a serious American initiative that would force Israel to commit to a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. However, achieving a two-state solution will require significant diplomatic efforts and compromises from all parties involved. The heavy fighting in northern Gaza and accusations of war crimes from both sides highlight the devastating impact of the Israel-Gaza war on civilians. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire, with hospitals being targeted and children making up a significant portion of the casualties. The international community must continue to condemn any actions that result in the loss of innocent lives and push for an immediate ceasefire. Lastly, the poll on Middle Eastern investment in U.S. sports reveals Americans' mixed views on the matter. While some view it negatively, others are indifferent. As Middle Eastern investment in U.S. sports continues to grow, it will be interesting to see how public opinion evolves and whether the NFL will follow suit. That's all for today's news. Remember, your thoughts and opinions matter. What are your ideas on these topics? I welcome your questions and comments. Let's engage in a lively discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6do Brief via email.